Now the topic before us is central bank reserves versus physical cash. Separate ratios in fractional reserve banking. Whether separate ratio is assigned for cash and for funds at central bank in fractional reserve banking system. We will first understand the question, what the question is. We have already learned that in the case of fractional reserve banking, if say $1,000 is deposited in the bank, the banks have to keep a certain percentage or a certain fraction of these deposits as reserves. In the shape of reserves, they have to kept aside some amount as kept aside. Suppose the reserve ratio is 10%. We have already learned that this reserve ratio is fixed by the central bank of the country, and each commercial bank has to comply with the same. So now, when the initial deposit is $1,000, banks have kept the reserves of 10%, and now they will give the balance amount of $900 on loan. They can give, they how much they give, it depends on that banks. However, they are in a position to give $900 on loan because it is 90% which has been kept for loans after keeping 10% aside. Now the question arises, this reserve consists of two parts. One is some amount has to be kept as cash by the bank, and some amount of these reserves has to be kept in the central bank funds. In other words, we can say that this amount belongs to central bank and the commercial bank cannot use it. Or so this reserve consists of two parts: cash plus central bank funds, funds which are to be parked with the central bank. So now the question arises, how much percentage of is cash out of this 10%? How much reserve is cash? How much amount of this reserves is central bank? Whether it is 2% cash or 8% central bank or 8% cash or 2%. Now this is the question. How much percentage of the reserves is cash and how much percentage of the reserves belongs to central bank funds? So we will find the answer. While it is possible in that the fractional reserve banking system can define separate reserve ratios for physical cash and central bank account funds, it means that central bank has the authority to decide how much amount will be kept in the reserves. They also have the authority, that is the central bank also had the authority to decide how much percentage will be kept in cash and how much percentage will be kept in the funds of the central bank. They can decide, but it is not a common practice. Usually it is not done by the central bank, though they can do it. Usually they give the overall limit, that is cash plus funds at central bank at all should meet a specific criteria, that is say 10%. Both these amounts, cash plus funds at central bank, both should together constitute the reserve ratio amount which is fixed by the central bank. Usually there is no breakdown between the cash portion and the central bank account portion. The reserve requirement is typically expressed as a single percentage of the total customer deposits. Suppose we assume that there are say $100 $1 lakh in deposit with a particular bank. Now the banks are say required to keep the reserve requirement of say 5%. now the banks will keep only $500 as reserves, and they will be in a position to lend out $95,000. So here the reserve requirement is expressed only as a percentage of the total customer deposit. It usually does not break down how much to be kept in cash, how much to be kept in central bank's accounts. This reserve requirement applies to a combination of cash and central bank account funds. The goal is to ensure that bank as a whole maintains the required total reserves. It means that overall the central bank only wants that 10% has to be kept aside, say 10%. Reserve ratio which has been fixed, that amount should be kept aside either as cash or at the central bank. The main purpose is that specific amount should be kept aside. However, the exact rules and practices may differ from country to country and regulatory authority. From each country to country, this practice may differ. The central bank may or may not decide or differentiate between what amount should be kept in cash and what amount should be kept at the central bank funds. Thanks for watching. If you like our course, please spare some time to give a star rating to our course.